Did you know that cruise ships report more paranormal activity during Halloween week than any other time of year, with over 300 documented incidents in the last decade alone? Tonight, I'm sharing 10 true horror stories that will make you think twice before booking that Halloween cruise. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. If you have your own cruise ship horror story, I want to hear it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss what's coming next. I thought he was just really committed to his costume until I saw the blood was real. October 2019 was supposed to be the perfect girls' trip. Me and 3 of my closest friends from college had been planning this Halloween cruise for 8 months. We booked the Royal Caribbean Harmony of the Seas, 7 nights sailing through the Caribbean with a stop in Cozumel. The ship was massive, holding over 6,000 passengers, and the cruise line had gone all out with Halloween decorations. There were fake cobwebs draped across the atriums, skeleton crews manning the pools, and jack-o'-lanterns lining every corridor. As a marketing consultant, I appreciated the attention to detail. They'd really committed to the theme. We were staying in connecting cabins on Deck 9, starboard side, which gave us an amazing view of the ocean. The first 2 days were exactly what we'd hoped for. We spent our time by the pool, attended the welcome parties, and planned our costumes for the big Halloween contest on the final night. The prize was a free cruise for 2, and we were determined to win. My friend Naomi had brought elaborate makeup supplies, and we'd spent hours researching the most creative costume ideas. On the 3rd night, we decided to take photos in the corridor outside our cabins. The lighting was perfect there, with these vintage-style sconces that gave everything a warm, golden glow. The decorative mirrors and old-fashioned wallpaper made it look like something out of a classic horror movie. We were practicing poses for the costume contest, trying different angles with our phones. I was using my iPhone 11, and the camera quality was incredible. We must have taken 50 photos that night, laughing and acting dramatic for the camera. When we got back to the cabin and started reviewing the photos, Naomi noticed something strange. In one of the shots where we were all grouped together, there was a figure visible at the far end of the hallway behind us. A man in what looked like a Victorian plague doctor costume, complete with the long-beaked mask and a wide-brimmed hat. The costume was remarkably detailed, all black with leather gloves and what appeared to be an authentic period coat. We didn't remember seeing anyone else in the hallway when we were taking photos. The corridor had been empty, which was why we'd chosen that spot. But there he was in the image, standing perfectly still about 20 feet behind us. Naomi zoomed in on her phone. The detail was unsettling. You could see the texture of the leather mask, the way the coat hung on his frame. Even more disturbing, there seemed to be dark stains on the front of the costume, concentrated around the chest area. We convinced ourselves that he must have walked by while we were focused on posing, and we just hadn't noticed. Ships are crowded during Halloween cruises. People wear costumes at all hours. It made sense. We laughed it off and went to dinner. The next evening, we returned to the same spot for more photos. We wanted to get our lighting and poses perfect before the actual contest. This time, we were more aware of our surroundings, deliberately checking to make sure no one else was in the frame. We took another round of pictures, again maybe 40 or 50 shots over the course of half an hour. Back in the cabin, my friend Promise was scrolling through her photos when she went completely silent. Her face had drained of color. She turned her phone toward us without saying a word. There, in her photos from tonight, was the same plague doctor figure. But this time, he was closer, much closer. In the first few shots, he was barely visible in the distance. But as we scrolled through the sequence of images, he appeared to be moving toward us, getting closer in each successive photo. In the final image, he was standing less than 10 feet away. The thing that made my stomach drop was that we had been watching that hallway. We'd been deliberately careful. There had been no one else there. The corridor had been empty the entire time we were shooting. Naomi's hands were shaking as she pulled up her own photos from that night. Same thing. The figure appeared in her images too, progressively closer. Then I checked mine. My blood ran cold. Not only was he in my photos, but when I zoomed in on the most recent image, you could see detail on the mask that hadn't been visible before. There were cracks in the leather, and those stains on the costume, they definitely looked like dried blood. Old blood, brown and crusted. But here's what really terrified us. When we compared our photos, we realized we'd been taking pictures at slightly different times, from different angles. Yet the figure appeared in all of our images, always in the same relative position, always facing toward us. And in every single photo, despite being in different positions in the hallway, his reflection wasn't visible in any of the decorative mirrors behind him. We decided to report it to ship security. This had to be some kind of prank, maybe something involving augmented reality or photo manipulation. The security officer was polite, but clearly thought we were overreacting. He explained that during Halloween cruises, passengers often wore elaborate costumes at all hours. He suggested the figure was just another guest who happened to be in the background of our photos. We showed him the sequence of images on our phones. His expression changed when he saw how the figure appeared to move closer in each shot. He asked us to send him the photos and said he'd look into it. Before we left, he mentioned something that made my skin crawl. He asked which deck we were staying on. When we told him Deck 9, starboard side, he paused for just a moment too long. Then he said he'd check the costume rental records and get back to us. The next morning, a different security officer came to our cabin. He explained that they'd reviewed all the costume rentals on the ship. No one had rented or registered a plague doctor costume. In fact, that particular type of costume wasn't even available in their inventory. He asked if we'd be willing to avoid that particular corridor for the remainder of the cruise. When Naomi asked why, he became evasive. He just said it would be better if we used the other hallways on our deck. That afternoon, we decided to investigate on our own. We went to the ship's library, where they kept historical records and information about the vessel. The Harmony of the Seas had been in service since 2016. But the library also contained information about Royal Caribbean's history and previous ships in their fleet. We spent 3 hours going through old records and digitized newspaper clippings. That's when Promise found it. An article from October 1973 about an incident on one of Royal Caribbean's earlier ships. A passenger had died during a Halloween cruise under mysterious circumstances. He'd been found in a corridor on what would be equivalent to Deck 9 on modern ships. He'd been wearing a Victorian plague doctor costume, apparently a family heirloom. The article mentioned that he'd suffered some kind of violent accident. His body had been discovered by other passengers, and there had been significant blood loss. The costume had never been recovered. Some passengers reported seeing him in the hallways even after his body had been removed. The article included a small, grainy photograph of the ship's corridor where the incident had occurred. The wallpaper pattern was identical to the one outside our cabin. The same vintage sconces, the same decorative mirrors. We stopped taking photos in that hallway. We stopped going near it at all. But the plague doctor had other plans. On Halloween night, the costume contest was held in the main theater. The room was packed with hundreds of passengers in elaborate outfits. We'd worked hard on our group costume, a coordinated set inspired by classic movie monsters. The energy in the room was electric. People were laughing, comparing costumes, taking photos with each other. The contest was judged in categories. When they announced the vintage costume category, about 20 people lined up on stage. The crowd cheered and applauded as each contestant showed off their outfit. Then I saw him, standing at the far right of the stage, perfectly still among the other contestants. The plague doctor, that same black costume with the beaked mask and wide-brimmed hat, those same dark stains across the chest. But no one else seemed to notice anything wrong. The MC was making jokes. The audience was laughing. I grabbed Naomi's arm and pointed. She saw him too. So did Promise and my other friend Saul. We watched as the MC moved down the line of contestants, speaking to each one. When he reached the spot where the plague doctor stood, he simply moved past, as if there was no one there. The figure's head slowly turned toward us in the audience. Even from that distance, even through that leather mask, I felt like he was looking directly at me. Then he stepped off the stage. He walked down the steps, moving through the crowd. People didn't move aside for him. He walked through them as if they weren't there, or as if he wasn't there. He was moving toward our row. Naomi grabbed my hand. Her palm was ice cold and slick with sweat. The figure kept coming, pushing through the crowd that couldn't see him. He reached our row, started moving sideways between the seats, coming directly toward where I sat. I couldn't move. My entire body had locked up with terror. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I thought I might pass out. He stopped directly in front of me, reached out one leather-gloved hand. I felt the temperature drop around me so suddenly that my breath came out in a visible cloud. His fingers were inches from my face when I finally managed to scream. The sound that came out of me was primal. Half the theater turned to look. The figure's hand touched my cheek, and it was like being touched by frozen metal. Pain shot through my face. More people were screaming now, not just my friends. Other people could see him now. At least a dozen witnesses watched as the plague doctor stood there, his hand on my face, his head tilted as if examining me. Then he was gone. Just vanished. Security rushed over. The contest was stopped. There was chaos in the theater as people tried to explain what they'd seen. Some said they'd witnessed a man in a costume disappear. Others insisted they'd seen nothing at all. I had a red mark on my cheek in the exact shape of a hand, and my skin was so cold to the touch that the ship's medical staff worried about frostbite. The ship's historian came to see us later that night. She was an older woman who'd worked for Royal Caribbean for 30 years. She brought a file folder with old photographs and documents. She confirmed what we'd found in the library. A passenger had died on a predecessor ship in 1973, in that exact costume, on that exact deck configuration. His body had been prepared for transport off the ship, but somewhere between the medical bay and the port, the body had vanished. It had never been recovered. She told us that every few years, during Halloween cruises, there were reports, photos with unexplained figures, sightings in the Deck 9 corridors. Usually, the reports were dismissed as overactive imaginations or people playing pranks. But the staff knew. They'd known for decades. The costume contest incident was different because of the multiple witnesses, because of the physical mark on my face. She apologized. Though what good an apology does against something like that, I don't know. I haven't been able to look at Halloween photos since that cruise. Not just the ones from the ship, but any Halloween photos. Last year, I went through my apartment and threw away every Victorian-era item I owned. a decorative mirror, some antique books, a vintage coat I'd loved. I couldn't stand having them around. My friends and I barely speak now. The experience created this wedge between us that we've never been able to overcome. Every time we try to get together, we all feel it. That same cold presence, that same watching sensation. I deleted every photo from that cruise except for one. I kept the final image from the hallway, the one where the plague doctor is closest, where you can see the details of the mask and the dried blood on his costume. Sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep, I look at that photo. I zoom in on the mask, on those dark eye holes, and I swear, even though I know it's impossible, I can see something looking back at me from inside that darkness. Still watching, still waiting, still there in ways I'll never fully understand or escape. Every night, our cabin was different, and the crew kept insisting we were remembering it wrong. My wife and I wanted our 10th anniversary to be unforgettable. We settled on a week-long Halloween cruise through the Mexican Riviera, not because we were thrill seekers, but because it seemed safe, fun, almost cliché. We were both practical people, both in tech and lived by checklists. Everything about the Carnival Vista was exactly as expected as we boarded in Long Beach. Huge atrium, neon lights, casino chips pulsing under bored fingers, and a steady thrum everywhere except the oddly stuffy corridor that led to our cabin. B107. That's where things quietly started to unravel. We'd booked a budget interior. No window, but comfortable enough, or at least it should have been. As soon as we dropped our suitcases, there was this thick, musty odor like wet cardboard or old carpet after a leak. My wife wrinkled her nose but shrugged it off. She spent a decade with me and my quirks. We joked about haunted house smells and got dressed for the welcome dinner, ignoring how strangely cold it felt around the bathroom door. Back from the casino late, we dropped onto the bed and slept hard. The first weird thing happened the next morning. I woke thinking something was off. The bedside table was on the other side, and the luggage rack, for sure on the left last night, was now blocking the bathroom. I blamed my memory, then the cleaning crew. Maybe they'd moved things for a deep clean after embarkation. But my wife was certain too. "Didn't you sleep closest to the bathroom?" she asked, shivering. She had been, but now I was. The cabin number plate on the inside said B147, just as our keycard did. But the numbers seemed slightly crooked, as if glued just that morning. We spent the day in Cabo San Lucas trying to forget it. Sunlight, margaritas, a shore excursion to El Arco, buying authentic blankets in the market. But that night, everything in the room had shifted again. The trash can was bolted to the wrong wall, and the closet mirrored the opposite side. Even the screws in the light fixtures seemed new, shiny, not tarnished. Still, it was just a weird cruise thing, I told myself. We'll laugh about this when we're back home. That laughter didn't last. Next morning, after too little sleep, my wife yanked open the bathroom door and yelped. The door had once swung in, but now opened out. The hinges were on the other side, impossible unless the entire door had been replaced overnight. My stomach dropped. Our suitcases were unzipped. My phone charger, always by my bed, was now plugged in by the entrance. We called guest services. The attendant smiled blandly, checked our keys, and finding B147, assured us nothing was amiss. "Maybe you swapped rooms for a night?" she offered, as if we might have moved in our sleep. So there's a kind of madness that seeps in when your physical space, your safe space, won't hold still. We started documenting everything. My wife took videos on her phone before bed, panning across the room, the door, Our luggage, the bathroom setup, even the overhead vent. We made a little game of it each night. Spot the differences. By the fourth night, the nightmare had escalated. Her video from last night showed the room as we remembered. But by morning, the closet had swapped places with the tiny desk. But here's the clincher. The wall with our towel rack now displayed a different wallpaper pattern entirely. Our bath towels were stamped B174, not B147. We hurried out and scanned every number along our hallway. Cabins around us were B143, B145, B149, but no B174 or B741, which was the number stitched into our new room slippers on day 5. That night, my wife woke me in pure panic. The room was colder than anywhere else on the ship, our breaths forming faint clouds in the air. The overhead lights flickered, casting the room into sickly pulses of blue and yellow. She said the walls moved that night, not metaphorically. Furniture slid across the carpet, grinding but silent, like watching a video played in reverse slow motion. In the dark, the closet door receded as if the wall was stretching. I tried the door. The handle wouldn't budge, like it was sealed with concrete. The air felt crushing, thick and heavy, our lungs working against the freeze. My wife pounded on the wall. The sound was unnervingly dead, as if absorbed into nothingness. For a long moment, I thought maybe we'd die of cold, locked into whatever impossible geometry the room had become. Then, a sudden lurch. The light snapped to full brightness, and the door swung open with no resistance. The corridor outside buzzed with normal cruise life. Laughter, rolling carts, the faint drone of slot machines. Our room now read B174, but the cleaning staff in the hallway acted like they'd seen us emerge 100 times. I asked about B147, but she only pointed down the way, saying, B147? Oh, I think that's moved. Happens sometimes on holidays. That was the moment everything fundamentally changed. No more dismissing it as sleep deprivation, no rational explanations. We had entered the heart of the impossible. We pushed to see the records. My wife, always the gentle negotiator, convinced the guest services supervisor to pull up our booking. Their screen displayed our reservation, but showed 3 different cabin numbers, one for each night, none assigned at the time. The employee looked up, brow furrowing. B147 hasn't been in the system for years, she mumbled, then closed the record as if she'd revealed a trade secret. Desperate for answers now, we went to the back office area near the galley, following a tip from a sympathetic technician. He said he'd seen cabins go weird before, especially around late October. He handed us a faded photocopy from the ship's records. In 2003, there was a murder-suicide in B147 during Halloween week. The cabin had been decommissioned, the door welded shut, and its number removed from the system. Yet somehow, B147 kept appearing in the computer, shifting like a ghost through the grid of rooms, unassigned but always present. He admitted in a low voice, "Sometimes people check in, and the room is just not where it should be. We've seen walls move on cameras." He couldn't say more, clearly frightened himself. "Do other guests ever get stuck inside?" My wife asked softly, hugging her arms. "Not usually," he whispered. "But the ones who do come back different. Like they lost track of something important, what room, what night, who they are. It never lasts long. Just long enough to remind us to leave B147 alone." We begged to be moved. They transferred us to a room with a porthole, way up on deck 12. As we rolled our bags down the hall, I glanced back at the place our cabin had been. No door, not even a seam in the paneling, just smooth wall where B147 should have been. After we left, sleep didn't come easy for weeks. Whenever I checked into a hotel, I paced around, measuring the position of every lamp, every hinge, every weird little fixture. I handwritten mapped layouts before sleeping, and my wife would joke, "You're not on the Vista anymore." But it wasn't funny. Sometimes, at home, if I left my bedroom for a minute and came back, I'd swear something had shifted. The dresser, the closet handle, like the echo of that impossible room calling me back. On my phone, I still have the videos we shot each night on the cruise. I've sent them to a couple friends in the hopes someone can spot a trick or a clue. But the footage is undeniable. Each night, the furniture swaps places. The door handle flips. Bathroom, closet, desk, all shuffle, sometimes marked with different numbers. Towels swap monograms. The metadata, and I checked it obsessively, shows a perfect chronological order, time-stamped from the Carnival Vista, every night from October 28th to November 4th, 2021. The date we left that hallway for the last time, November 2nd, was the same night as the murder-suicide 18 years ago. I learned from the technician later that it happened in a cold snap, one of the coldest October nights in the Mexican Riviera's history. The newspapers in the ship's archive tell the rest. How the room was dismantled, how the ship's blueprints don't include B-147 anymore, how guest records sometimes print out with mysterious, shifting cabin numbers. Once, in the middle of the night at home, I woke up, and the temperature in our bedroom had dropped so fast, my breath came out in a fine mist. For a split second, in the light from the hallway, I thought my closet was on the wrong side. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. I turned on every light I could find. Even now, as I write this, I triple-check my surroundings. Are the windows right? Is the bed aligned exactly as it was? Sometimes I think I hear the gentle shift of a wall, or the slight thud of a closet moving in slow motion. My wife doesn't like to talk about it anymore, but I've caught her running her hands along the edges of our bedroom just to make sure nothing's moved. People say the world is built on reliable physics, that walls cannot slip through dimensions or numbers change without cause. But deep in the heart of a cruise ship, where corridors wind into identical, indistinct lengths and time slips in routines, I learned different. And some nights, when the temperature dips, I close my eyes and I'm back in B-147, stranded in a room that rearranges itself, forever waiting for the night when the walls move in, and I don't find the door at all. The children kept talking about someone named Miss Gray, but according to Disney, no one by that name worked on the ship. I'd been an elementary teacher for 4 years when our school district approved the educational cruise. 25th graders, myself, and 2 parent chaperones aboard the Disney Dream for 5 days through the Bahamas. It was October 2020, and we'd finally gotten clearance to travel again after the lockdowns. The kids were excited beyond measure, and honestly, so was I. Disney had a reputation for safety, for structure, for making everything magical. I trusted that completely. We boarded in Port Canaveral on October 15th, and the ship was stunning. The kids' eyes went wide at the massive atrium, the character appearances, the promise of pools and activities. We had them enrolled in Camp Oceaneers, Disney's kids program, for a few hours each day so the chaperones could have some breathing room. The counselors seemed professional, energetic, wearing their bright yellow staff shirts with name tags clearly visible. I took photos of each one, made notes of their names, kept everything documented like the responsible teacher I was. On the second day, during lunch, one of my students mentioned that Miss Gray had taught them a really pretty song during morning activities. I smiled and asked which counselor that was, thinking maybe I'd missed someone during check-in. The child said Miss Gray wore a different uniform, an old-fashioned one with a long skirt and a white collar. She had pale skin and dark hair pulled back tight, and she sang songs that sounded like lullabies, but in words they didn't quite understand. I made a mental note to ask the Camp Oceaneers director about it. Maybe it was a character performer doing something special for Halloween, though it seemed odd they'd use an unfamiliar name. When I inquired that afternoon, the director looked confused. She pulled up the staff roster on her tablet, scrolling through every name. No one named Gray, no special performers scheduled, no one in period costumes for the kids' program. I told myself the children had misheard a name or were playing pretend. Fifth graders have active imaginations, especially in an exciting environment like this. But that night, 3 more students mentioned Miss Gray during dinner. They described her identically. The old uniform, the tight dark hair, the songs. One boy said she'd taught them breathing exercises for swimming, showing them how to hold their breath for a really long time underwater. Something cold settled in my stomach. I went back to the kids' club after dinner, asked to speak with the senior counselor. She was patient, walking me through the day's activities. Music time, craft projects, a scavenger hunt. No breathing exercises. No one in historical costumes. She even pulled up the security footage from the kids' club and let me watch. I saw my students sitting in a circle during music time. But what disturbed me was how several of them were clearly looking at an empty spot in the circle, nodding along, mouching words as if someone were leading them in song. But that spot was empty. Just empty floor. The counselor went pale when I pointed it out. She rewound it, watched again. "They're probably just playing a game," she said. But her voice had lost its confidence. By the third day, October 17th, 12 of my 20 students had mentioned Miss Gray. They spoke about her with this dreamy, distant quality, like she was the most wonderful person they'd ever met. The songs she taught were so beautiful and made them feel floaty. One girl said Miss Gray told them that water was nothing to be afraid of, that breathing underwater was easy once you learned the trick, that the ocean was calling them home. That's when I started to panic. I pulled my students out of the kids' program entirely, told the chaperones we'd supervise them ourselves for the rest of the cruise. But the damage was already done. The children had become obsessed with the ocean. During our stop in Nassau on the 18th, I had to physically hold back 2 students who tried to jump off the pier into the harbor. They weren't being reckless or playful. They were calm, serene even, walking deliberately toward the edge while humming that same melody I'd heard them sing before. That night, I barely slept. I positioned myself in the hallway between the students' cabins, doing bed checks every hour. At 1:47 a.m., I heard something. A soft singing, faint and far away, coming from the direction of the upper decks. I followed the sound, my heart hammering, and found 3 of my students in their pajamas, walking barefoot toward the ship's railing on deck 11. Their eyes were half closed, their lips moving in unison, chanting words I couldn't understand, but that made my skin crawl. The melody was haunting, ancient sounding, like something pulled from the bottom of the ocean. The children walked in perfect synchronization, their arms loose at their sides, heading directly toward a section of railing that was lower, easier for small bodies to climb. I screamed their names and ran. Grabbed the closest child by the shoulders, shook him hard. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. The other 2 were already climbing onto the lower railing bar. I yanked them back with strength I didn't know I had, all 3 of us collapsing onto the deck. They kept singing, kept chanting, even as I held them down. The words were rhythmic, hypnotic. Gray lady calls us, gray water holds us, gray morning finds us, breathing below. Security arrived within minutes, alerted by my screaming. The children snapped out of it slowly, confused about why they were on the deck in their pajamas, why I was crying and holding them so tightly. They remembered nothing. Not walking up here, not the song, not climbing the railing. But when I asked if they remembered Miss Gray, all three smiled peacefully and said, "She's so nice. She said we'd see her again soon." The ship's medical staff checked the children. Physically, they were fine. No signs of drugs, no medical explanations for the sleepwalking. But when I demanded answers from Disney, demanded to know what was happening, I was taken to a private office below deck, away from passengers. A senior officer sat across from me, his face grave. He asked me to sign a non-disclosure agreement before he'd say anything. I refused. I told him I was responsible for 20 children and I needed the truth. He was silent for a long moment, then pulled out a file. Inside were old, yellowed documents, photographs from the 1920s. A ship called the SS Gray Line, a passenger vessel that had operated similar routes through the Bahamas. In October 1923, the ship had encountered a sudden storm. A crew member, a young woman working in the children's program, had been on deck with 7 children during an activity when a massive wave swept them all overboard. None of the bodies were ever recovered. The crew member's name was listed in the manifest, Miss Elizabeth Gray. The officer explained that the Disney Dreams route passes directly over the location where the SS Gray Line sank. Every October, there are incidents. Children report seeing a woman in old-fashioned clothing. Security footage shows them interacting with empty spaces. And sometimes, children sleepwalk toward the water. It doesn't happen every cruise, but it happens enough that senior staff know about it. They've tried changing routes in October, but the incidents follow the ship regardless of the path taken. He showed me grainy security footage from previous years. Different children, different cruises, but the same behavior. Walking in a trance, singing in unison, trying to reach the water. In one clip from 2015, a child had actually made it over the railing before crew pulled them back. The child had been smiling the entire time, arms outstretched, welcoming the fall. "Why don't you warn people?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why don't you cancel October cruises?" He looked tired, older than his years. "Would you believe us if we told you? Would parents book cruises if we said a ghost drowns children every October?" He leaned forward. "We do everything we can. Extra night staff, increased monitoring, counselors trained to watch for the signs. But she finds them anyway. She wants them to join her. She's been alone in that water for over 100 years, and the children she lost are still with her, still singing her songs." I left teaching 3 months after we returned home. I couldn't stand in front of a classroom anymore without seeing those 3 children climbing that railing, without hearing that melody in my head. I started having panic attacks whenever I was around groups of kids. At the playground, at the grocery store, anywhere children gathered and played and sang. Because sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I'd see a woman in an old-fashioned uniform standing among them, watching, waiting, her dark hair pulled back tight, her pale face expressionless. The nightmares are the worst. I dream I'm underwater, my lungs burning, but I can't swim up. Around me, children float peacefully, their eyes open, their mouths moving in that same chant. And standing below us in the murky depths, arms outstretched and welcoming, is Miss Gray. In the dreams, I understand the words they're singing. they're not just a song. They're directions. Instructions for how to stop fighting, how to let the water in, how to breathe the ocean and never surface again. I still have the security footage the officer gave me, time-stamped October 18th, 2020, 1:52 a.m. It shows 3 small figures walking across an empty deck, their mouths moving in perfect unison. And if you turn up the volume, past the wind and the distant engine hum, you can hear it. Faint but unmistakable. A woman's voice, singing a lullaby in a language that predates words, calling children home to the gray water where she waits, patient and eternal, for the next October cruise. As a scientist, I can explain most natural phenomena. But the fog that stalked our ship defied every law of meteorology. I'd spent 18 years studying ocean ecosystems, published dozens of papers, and prided myself on rational thinking. When the invitation came for an academic conference cruise aboard the Norwegian Breakaway in October 2018, I jumped at it. A week in the North Atlantic, presenting research while the ship was decked out in Halloween decorations for regular passengers. It seemed like the perfect blend of work and novelty. I brought 3 colleagues, all marine scientists like myself, equipped with portable monitoring equipment to collect data during the voyage. We were curious, methodical people who trusted instruments over intuition. We departed from New York on October 24th, heading toward the open Atlantic. The ship was massive, carrying over 4,000 people, most of them families enjoying the Halloween festivities. Our group spent the first 2 days in conference rooms, discussing deep-sea thermal vents and plankton migration patterns, occasionally stepping out to the observation decks to check ocean conditions. The weather was typical for late October. Cool, overcast, with moderate swells. Nothing unusual registered on any of our equipment or the ship's sophisticated meteorological systems. On the morning of October 27th, around 9 a.m., I was on deck 12 running water samples when I noticed something odd on the horizon. A dense bank of fog, isolated and contained, sitting motionless about 2 miles off our starboard side. Fog itself isn't unusual in the North Atlantic, but this formation was peculiar. It was too localized, too symmetrical, like a gray wall rising from the ocean surface. I pulled out my handheld weather monitor. Air pressure normal, temperature consistent. Humidity levels didn't support fog formation. I mentioned it to one of my colleagues at lunch. She'd seen it too and had the same reaction, meteorologically improbable but not impossible. We decided to monitor it. By 3 p.m., the fog bank had moved. It was now off our port side, maintaining the same distance from the ship. We'd changed course twice during the day, adjusting our route based on the captain's navigation plan. Yet the fog seemed to reposition itself to stay parallel with us. That evening, I approached the bridge crew with my observations. The officer on duty was polite but dismissive. He pulled up the radar display, completely clear. No fog bank registered. The satellite imagery showed nothing either. He suggested it might be a visual distortion, light playing tricks through the atmosphere. But I'd photographed it. My colleagues had photographed it. It was there, undeniably solid and gray, tracking our movement. By nightfall, the fog had crept closer. Now less than a mile away, its density seemed to have increased. Standing on the outer deck, I could see it illuminated by the ship's running lights. A churning, roiling mass that moved in ways fog shouldn't move. There was no wind pushing it. The air was still, almost unnaturally calm. Yet within the fog, shapes shifted and coiled, darker forms moving through the gray, like something alive swimming through murky water. Other passengers had noticed it now. Small groups gathered at the railings, pointing, taking photos. A few made jokes about ghost ships and Halloween effects, assuming Disney or the cruise line had engineered some kind of atmospheric projection as part of the holiday theme. But I knew better. You can't fake something that doesn't show up on radar. You can't project an image that maintains consistent three-dimensional depth and parallax across multiple viewing angles. Around 10 p.m., the fog made contact with the ship. It rolled across the stern deck like a living thing, tendrils reaching forward, wrapping around the railing. The temperature dropped instantly. I watched my breath materialize in front of me. My handheld monitor went haywire, the screen flickering between impossible readings. Temperature 40 degrees, then 98 degrees, then error codes I'd never seen. Passengers stumbled backward, away from the fog, but a few stood frozen, staring into it. I saw faces in the fog, not vague suggestions or pareidolia, actual human faces, pressed against the gray as if trapped behind frosted glass. Mouths open, eyes wide, hands reaching toward the ship. One woman near me gasped and pointed, whispering that she recognized someone in there, a friend who died years ago. The faces weren't static. They moved, followed passengers with their eyes, mouthed words we couldn't hear. Then 3 passengers walked into it, just stepped over the railing and disappeared into the churning gray. No hesitation, no struggle. They moved like sleepwalkers, arms at their sides, faces blank. Security tried to stop them, but couldn't react fast enough. The fog swallowed them completely. We rushed to the edge, shouting their names, but there was nothing. Just that impenetrable wall of gray, now pressed directly against the ship's hull. The ship's electronics began failing. Navigation systems flickered. The GPS signal dropped. Radio communication turned to static. The captain ordered all passengers inside, declared an emergency, and attempted to steer away from the fog. But no matter which direction we turned, the fog surrounded us. Within 20 minutes, it had engulfed the entire ship. Inside that fog, reality bent. The ship's lights barely penetrated 3 feet. The air tasted metallic, like blood and salt. Time felt wrong. My watch showed 10:47 p.m., but it felt like hours had passed, or maybe only seconds. My colleagues and I huddled in one of the interior conference rooms, our equipment completely non-functional. Every device we'd brought, laptops, monitors, GPS units, even our phones, displayed corrupted data or simply shut down. Around what we thought was 2 a.m., though we couldn't be sure. The hallucinations started. Shared hallucinations, which should be scientifically impossible. Passengers and crew throughout the ship reported seeing the same things. Waterlogged figures walking the corridors, dripping seawater onto the carpet, leaving wet footprints that faded in seconds. Voices calling from empty staterooms. The sound of hundreds of people screaming, distant but clear, coming from somewhere below deck. I saw them too. Dozens of people in old-fashioned clothing, 1950s-style dresses, suits with narrow lapels, women with victory rolls in their hair. They moved through the walls, through furniture, paying no attention to us. Some were burned. Others looked crushed, broken. All of them were soaking wet. They wandered the ship like they were searching for something, opening doors that weren't there, climbing stairs that didn't exist. The crew was panicking. Several officers reported that the ship's heading was changing on its own, the wheel unresponsive, turning us toward coordinates no one had entered. The captain fought the controls, but the breakaway moved like it was being pulled, dragged through the water by an external force. The fog outside had grown so dense it looked solid, like we were encased in concrete. Then the voices started. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all speaking at once through the ship's PA system, though no one was transmitting. They were begging, pleading for help. screaming that they were drowning, that the ship was sinking, that they couldn't find the lifeboats. "We're at 42 degrees north, 50 degrees west," they kept repeating. "Please, God, someone help us. The water is so cold. There are children down here. We can't get out." A crew member pulled up historical maritime records on one of the few computers still functioning. In October 1952, a passenger liner had sunk at those exact coordinates, 42 degree, 50 degree W, an unexplained structural failure in calm seas. The ship went down in less than 20 minutes, taking over 200 souls with it. Most of the bodies were never recovered. The wreck was never found, lying somewhere in the dark Atlantic depths below us. The captain was trying to turn us into a storm. On the radar, which had flickered back to partial function, you could see a massive weather system to the north. He was ready to sail directly into it, convinced the fog was somehow worse, that staying in these coordinates meant we'd suffer the same fate as that 1952 liner. Officers tried to physically restrain him, arguing over the controls. The ship lurched violently, alarms blaring. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the fog began to thin. It was 6:14 a.m. We'd been engulfed for over 6 hours, though it had felt simultaneously like minutes and days. The gray receded, pulling away from the ship in smooth, deliberate movements, condensing back into that isolated bank before dispersing entirely as the sun broke the horizon. The moment full daylight hit the water, every trace of fog vanished. The 3 passengers who'd walked into it were found unconscious on the stern deck, right where they disappeared hours earlier. They were soaking wet, their body temperatures dangerously low, but alive. When they woke in the medical bay, they remembered nothing after stepping to the railing. No fog, no walking, no missing time. Just a blank void where 6 hours should have been. All of our equipment had been permanently damaged. The data was corrupted beyond recovery, showing impossible readings that made no scientific sense. The ship's black box recorded 6 hours of what the technicians called environmental anomaly, a placeholder term for "we have no idea what happened." The Norwegian cruise line conducted an investigation, interviewed every passenger and crew member, then sealed the findings under a legal agreement. We were asked not to discuss the incident publicly, but I couldn't let it go. I spent months researching that 1952 sinking, tracking down survivor accounts and investigation reports. The descriptions matched what we'd experienced. Faces in the fog, voices begging for rescue, the ship pulled toward specific coordinates, shared hallucinations of drowning passengers. In the 1950s, they'd called it mass hysteria. In 2018, we had no better explanation. I tried to continue my research, but every time I approached the ocean, I'd see it. That wall of gray on the horizon, waiting. I'd wake up tasting salt water, hearing voices calling coordinates, feeling the phantom sensation of drowning. My colleagues reported similar experiences. One quit marine biology entirely. Another refused to discuss what happened, insisting we'd all experienced some form of group psychosis despite the physical evidence. I moved to Arizona in 2019, as far from the ocean as I could get in the continental United States. I couldn't explain what we'd encountered using any scientific framework I understood. The fog defied physics, meteorology, rational explanation. It moved with purpose. It knew where we were. It wanted something from us, or wanted to show us something. The memory of 200 people dying in cold water, still crying out for help 66 years later. I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2020. I can't look at fog anymore without my chest tightening, without feeling like I'm suffocating. I destroyed my marine biology credentials, burned 18 years of work, because I couldn't reconcile what I'd seen with what I'd spent my life believing. Science says ghosts don't exist. Science says fog is water vapor, governed by temperature and pressure. Science says shared hallucinations across thousands of people aren't possible. But I was there. I measured it, photographed it, watched it consume a ship full of people and show us the last moments of souls who never made it home. And sometimes, late at night in my landlocked desert home, I still hear them. Those voices calling coordinates, begging someone to find them in the cold Atlantic dark, promising they're still there, still waiting, still drowning in October fog that never lifts. I photograph every meal for my blog, which is how I know the same man has been eating at that table for 3 nights without ever being alive. Food blogging had become my entire career by 2022. I'd built an audience of over 200,000 followers who trusted my reviews, my photography, my honest takes on culinary experiences around the world. When Princess Cruises offered me a complimentary passage on the Regal Princess, Barcelona to Rome, late October, culminating in a Halloween midnight buffet, I didn't hesitate. Solo travel suited me. No distractions, complete creative control, and the freedom to document every dish without someone complaining about cold food. I boarded in Barcelona on October 28th with my Canon EOS R6, 3 lenses, and a detailed shot list. The Horizon Court Buffet on Deck 14 became my primary focus. Open 24 hours, constantly rotating menus, perfect natural lighting during the day, and moody ambiance at night. I photographed everything. The breakfast spreads with their perfectly arranged pastries, the lunch stations with carved meats and fresh seafood, the dinner displays that looked like edible art installations. On the first night, I was shooting the dessert section around 9 p.m. when I noticed him in the background of one of my frames. An elderly man, maybe 75 or 80, sitting alone at a corner table near the port side windows. He wore a formal tuxedo, full black tie, perfectly pressed, like he was attending a gala rather than a casual buffet. His white hair was slicked back, and he sat with impeccable posture, hands folded on the table in front of an untouched plate of food. I thought nothing of it. Cruise ships attract all types, and some older passengers dress formally for every meal as a personal tradition. I reviewed my photos back in my cabin that night, editing and uploading content. The man appeared in the background of 6 different shots, always at that same corner table, same position, same untouched plate. I made a mental note about the interesting composition. The solitary formal figure contrasted against the casual buffet chaos. The next evening, October 29th, I returned to document the themed Halloween decorations they'd added to the buffet. Carved pumpkins, fake cobwebs, orange lighting that gave everything a warm glow. I spent 2 hours shooting from different angles, capturing the details for my blog post about cruise holiday dining. When I reviewed the photos later, he was there again. Same table, same tuxedo, same posture. But here's what made my stomach tighten slightly. His plate looked identical to the night before. Same arrangement of food, same untouched state, as if no time had passed. I zoomed in on his face in the photos. His expression was neutral, eyes forward, not looking at anything in particular. But there was something off about the image quality around him. The rest of my photos were tack sharp. The R6 autofocus is phenomenal. But his figure had this subtle blur, like he was moving slightly even while sitting perfectly still, or like he existed on a different focal plane than the rest of reality. That night, I went through my previous photos more carefully. The metadata told me something impossible. In several shots taken minutes apart from different positions in the buffet, He appeared in the exact same position at his table. But the angles were wrong. If I'd moved 15 feet to the left between shots, the perspective of his table should have changed relative to the windows behind him. It hadn't. He remained in identical position and framing regardless of where I stood. On October 30th, I decided to test something. I arrived at the buffet at 3 p.m., unusual for me since I typically shot during peak meal times for the crowds and energy. The space was nearly empty, just a few passengers grazing, staff restocking stations. I set up at the far end, shot a series of photos, then moved progressively closer to that corner table, taking frames every few feet. 37 photos total, each from a different position. Back in my cabin, I laid them out in sequence. He was in every single one. But impossibly, he appeared closer to my camera in each successive shot, as if he'd moved toward me while I was moving toward him. Except I'd been watching that table the entire time. It had been empty. No one had sat there all afternoon. The realization hit like ice water. He wasn't physically present when I shot the photos. He only existed in the images themselves. I started researching. My blog had been running for 5 years, and I'd featured several cruise reviews. I pulled up posts from other food bloggers, searching for Princess Cruises content, specifically the Regal Princess and Horizon Court Buffet. It took 3 hours of digging through archived posts and image files, but I found him. Different bloggers, different years, always in the background of buffet photos, always the same corner table, always formal wear, always alone with an untouched plate. The earliest image I found was from 2019. Same man, same position. I expanded my search beyond food blogs, travel influencers, passenger photo galleries, cruise review sites. He appeared sporadically but consistently across 7 years of images. Not in every photo of that buffet, but often enough to establish a pattern. Always between October 27th and November 2nd. Always during the Halloween cruise week. I found one passenger review from 2020 where someone had specifically mentioned him in the comments. Anyone else notice the old guy in the tux who's always at that table but never eats? I tried to talk to him one night and he didn't respond. Weird vibe. Another comment from 2021. My wife took a bunch of photos, and that formal dinner guy is in the background of like 20 of them, even though we never saw him there. Creepy Halloween effect, maybe? But here's what made my hands shake. I found a cruise blogger's Instagram story from 2018. She'd posted a video walking through the buffet, phone camera panning across the room. When the camera swept past that corner table, empty in the video, her phone glitched. The image froze for half a second, pixelated, and in that frozen frame, you could see a blurred figure at the table before the video resumed with the table empty again. Halloween night, October 31st. The midnight buffet was the crown jewel of the cruise. An elaborate spread of themed foods, ice sculptures, chocolate fountains, passengers in costumes. I arrived at 11:45 p.m., camera ready, determined to get the shots I needed and avoid that corner table entirely. But as I moved through the buffet, photographing the elaborate displays, I felt it, the distinct sensation of being watched. Every photo I took, he was closer. Not in reality, the table remained empty when I glanced over, but in the images on my camera's display screen. In the first shot, he was at his usual table. By the 10th shot, he appeared to be standing near the dessert station. By the 20th, he was less than 15 feet away, standing among the other passengers who didn't react to his presence. At 12:07 a.m., my camera's display showed him directly behind me. I spun around, nothing there. Just other passengers loading plates, laughing, enjoying the buffet. But when I looked back at my camera screen, The last photo showed him facing my direction, looking directly at the camera lens for the first time. He was smiling. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I walked to that corner table. It was empty, as it had been all week. I set my camera down, framed a shot of the empty chair, and triggered the shutter. When I reviewed the image, he was sitting there in the photo, looking directly at me through the camera, that same smile. His untouched plate now showed something different, not food, but photographs. My photographs. Every image I'd taken during the cruise, printed and arranged on the plate like a meal. I heard his voice then, though his lips didn't move in the photo and there was no sound in the physical space around me. It came from somewhere inside my head, or maybe from the camera itself. Words in a language I'd never heard, but somehow understood completely. Your turn to be seen, but not remembered. The camera's display went black. The buffet lights seemed to dim, or maybe my vision was fading. I felt cold, impossibly cold, like the temperature had dropped 40 degrees in an instant. Other passengers moved around me in slow motion, their laughter distorted and deep. The last thing I remember was reaching toward the table, toward that empty chair where I could now see him with my actual eyes. Not through the camera, but physically present. Standing up, extending his hand toward me, his smile widening to show too many teeth, his eyes completely black. I woke up in the medical bay at 8:23 a.m. on November 1st. 8 hours gone. The ship's doctor said a steward found me unconscious on deck 14, slumped, against the buffet railing. They'd run tests, blood work, CT scan, everything normal except my core body temperature, which had been dangerously low when they'd found me. Mild hypothermia, unexplained given the climate-controlled environment. My camera was gone. Ship security said no camera had been found near me. I filed a report, searched everywhere, but it had vanished completely. When I checked my phone, my blog's cloud backup showed something that made my blood run cold. All my photos from the cruise had been deleted, wiped from my phone, my laptop, the cloud storage. Every single image from the past 4 days, gone, except for one folder. A folder I hadn't created, labeled with just a date, October 31st, 1985. Inside were 37 photos. All of them showed that corner table, that man in the tuxedo, from slightly different angles. And in the final photo, he was holding a camera, a vintage film camera from the 1980s, pointed toward where I must have been standing. The metadata on that last image showed it had been taken at 12:07 a.m. on November 1st, 2022. The exact moment I'd lost consciousness. A crew member took me to a small memorial wall near the ship's chapel later that day. Among the plaques commemorating passengers and crew who died aboard Princess vessels over the decades, I found his. The name meant nothing to me, but the details did. Passenger, died October 31st, 1985. Heart attack during midnight buffet service, Horizon Court, deck 14. Always dressed for formal night. An avid photographer. The plaque included a small photo. It was him, decades younger, but unmistakably the same face. And in the photo, he was holding a camera, smiling at whoever had taken his picture, standing in the exact corner of the buffet where I'd seen him for 3 nights. I deleted my food blog the day I got home. 200,000 followers, 5 years of work, gone. I couldn't look at the photos anymore, couldn't bear the thought of pointing a camera at food, at anything. Because now, when I try to photograph meals, I see him in every frame. Not in the actual image captured, but in the reflection on my phone screen, in the shadow at the edge of my vision, in the corner of every restaurant where I try to eat. I haven't been inside a restaurant in 2 years. I order delivery, eat at home with the lights on, and I never, ever take photos of food anymore. Because I understand now what he meant. He'd spent 37 years appearing in other people's photographs, seen but not remembered, documented but never acknowledged. A ghost trapped in images, watching the living through camera lenses. And now somehow, I'm visible in the same way. Friends who try to take photos with me report strange glitches. I appear blurred or in the wrong position, or sometimes not at all, even though I'm standing right there. My reflection in mirrors sometimes shows me sitting at a table with an empty plate, wearing clothes I'm not actually wearing, in rooms I'm not actually in. I found a photography forum last month where someone posted a question. Has anyone else noticed a woman in the background of their cruise photos who shouldn't be there? The thread had 43 responses. They'd all taken cruises in October. They'd all photographed buffets. And in their images, appearing more frequently each year, was a woman in modern clothes, sitting at a corner table with a camera around her neck and an empty plate in front of her, staring directly at whoever took the photo. The woman in those photos looks exactly like me. But I haven't been on a cruise ship since 2022. I'm still here in my apartment, writing this, trying to warn people. Though I suspect, like him, I'm already becoming something that exists more in photographs than in reality. Something seen but not remembered, documented but never real. And every October 31st at 12:07 a.m., my phone receives a photo I didn't take, showing me sitting at that table in the Horizon Court buffet, holding my Canon EOS R6, smiling at a camera I can't see, surrounded by people who will never know I'm there. I've conducted hundreds of safety drills, but this was the first time the lifeboat roster included names of people who'd been dead for decades. Safety inspection had been my profession for 12 years. I'd audited everything from offshore oil rigs to passenger ferries, always traveling incognito, observing procedures without the crew knowing they were being evaluated. My reputation in the industry was solid, thorough, fair, uncompromising when it came to protocol. When the Maritime Safety Board assigned me to audit MSC Cruises during their October 2023 Caribbean route, I booked passage under a false name and prepared my standard checklist. The MSC Seaside was a modern vessel, and I expected minor violations at worst. I certainly didn't expect to question my own sanity. I boarded in Miami on October 20th, blending in with the flood of Halloween cruise passengers. Families in costume, groups of friends already drinking, the usual cruise crowd. My cabin was deliberately chosen on deck 8, midship near Muster Station C, my primary audit target. I had recording equipment hidden in my jacket, a clipboard disguised as a tablet, and years of soulless regulations memorized. The mandatory safety drill was scheduled for 4 p.m. on October 22nd, our first full day at sea. The announcement came over the PA system at 3:47 p.m. All passengers report to assigned muster stations. I made my way to Station C, observing everything. Crew members in their bright safety vests directing confused passengers, families struggling with life jackets, the usual chaos of people who'd rather be at the pool. The drill coordinator, a young officer with a Croatian accent, stood on a raised platform with a clipboard and a megaphone. At exactly 4 p.m., he began calling names for roll call. Standard procedure to verify all passengers assigned to this station were present. I recorded everything on my concealed device, noting his clear enunciation, the passengers responding, the efficient process. Then I heard something that made my professional detachment crack. Between the names on the manifest, I heard other names, different names, called in a voice that wasn't quite the officer's voice. Slightly distorted, like it was coming through water or static. The officer would call out, "Thompson, party of 4," and I'd hear something underneath. "Valdez, party of 2." He'd call Morrison, cabin 847, and beneath it, Chen, cabin 432. I looked around. No other passengers seemed to notice. The officer continued his roll call without pause, checking names off his list. But I kept hearing those phantom names, getting clearer with each one. And here's what made my trained, rational mind start to panic. I recognized some of them, not personally, but professionally. I'd studied maritime disasters as part of my certification. One of the phantom names was identical to a family listed on the manifest of the SS Meridian, which sank in the Caribbean in 1962 with 193 passengers. Another matched a crew member from a 1978 ferry accident. A third was a passenger from a 1984 cruise ship fire. I pulled out my tablet, the real one, not the prop, and quickly searched maritime disaster databases. Every phantom name I'd heard corresponded to a real person who died at sea, most of them in the Caribbean, all of them in October across different years spanning 6 decades. The drill concluded. Passengers were dismissed back to their activities. I approached the officer, asked routine questions about the procedure, complimented his efficiency. Then I asked if he'd noticed anything unusual during the roll call. He looked puzzled. Like what? Everything had been standard, he assured me. Every passenger accounted for, no issues. That evening, I reviewed my audio recording in my cabin. The phantom names were there, captured clearly on the digital file. They weren't my imagination. I could hear them layered beneath the officer's voice. Sometimes several names spoken simultaneously, creating an unsettling chorus. The metadata showed no tampering, no audio artifacts that would suggest interference or malfunction. I couldn't include this in my official report. It was beyond the scope of safety violations. But I couldn't ignore it either. The next morning, I accessed the ship's storage area where backup life vests were kept, using credentials that technically exceeded my audit authority. Inside the heavy canvas bags, I found vests with names written on the inside collars in faded ink. Not the printed labels with passenger assignments, but handwritten names in old-fashioned script. The names matched the phantom roll call. Some were dated 1962, 1978, 1984, 1991, written in different handwriting styles, as if each had been added by different hands across decades. The ink was genuine vintage, chemically aged, not recently forged. I photographed everything, my hands shaking slightly as I documented evidence that made no rational sense. I spent October 23rd researching the ship's route. We were following a specific path through the Caribbean, and I cross-referenced our coordinates with historical maritime incidents. The pattern was undeniable. The MSC Seaside's October route passed directly over or very near the sites of 7 major maritime disasters spanning 1958 to 1994. The coordinates where we'd conducted the safety drill, 17 degree, 87 degree north, were within 2 nautical miles of where the SS Meridian had gone down in 1962. At 3:17 a.m. on October 24th, the emergency alarm shattered the night. 7 short blasts, 1 long, the international signal for abandoned ship. I was awake instantly, my training kicking in, already pulling on clothes and grabbing my life vest. The corridor filled with panicked passengers, crew members rushing to stations, the organized chaos of an actual emergency. But something was wrong. The crew members looked confused, talking rapidly on radios. I heard fragments. No alarm was activated. Systems show normal. Who authorized the signal? Yet the alarm continued blaring, undeniable and terrifying. I made it to muster station C. Other passengers were arriving, some crying, children screaming, everyone demanding to know what was happening. The same officer from the drill days earlier was there, looking pale and shaken, speaking into his radio. Station C reporting, "We have no confirmation of emergency. Repeat, no confirmation." Then I felt it. The ship listed slightly to port. Just a few degrees, but unmistakable to someone trained to notice such things. Passengers screamed. The officer's radio crackled with reports from engineering. Compartments 3 and 4 showing flooding. Wait, negative. Compartments are dry, sensors malfunctioning. No water ingress. Systems showing impossible readings. The PA system activated, but the voice that came through wasn't the captain's. It was older, crackled with static, speaking with an accent I couldn't place. "All passengers proceed calmly to lifeboat stations. This is not a drill. We are taking on water rapidly. Remain calm. Families with children first." But overlapping that voice was the captain's actual voice, confused and urgent. "All passengers, this is a false alarm. Repeat, false alarm. Return to your cabins. There is no emergency." Passengers heard different instructions. Some heard the evacuation order, others heard the all clear. Arguments broke out. The ship continued listing, now 5 degrees, then 7. The officer tried to organize an evacuation, but half the passengers were trying to leave, while others insisted we'd been told to stay. I checked my phone, 3:24 a.m. I pulled up my research notes, found the timeline for the SS Meridian disaster. It had struck an uncharted reef at 2:38 a.m. on October 24, 1962. The ship listed immediately, communications failed, passengers received conflicting instructions. It sank at 3:25 a.m., 47 minutes from impact to final plunge. We were experiencing their disaster in real time, overlaid on our reality like a recording playing through the ship's systems. I looked at the life vests being distributed. Some had modern MSC labels. Others, flickering in and out of visibility, showed faded 1960s-era designs. The listing worsened. 10 degrees now. Impossible to ignore. But when I looked at the horizon through the window, it was level. The ship wasn't actually listing. We were experiencing the memory of a ship that had listed 61 years ago. The water wasn't real. The flooding wasn't real. But our bodies felt it. Our instruments registered it. Our minds believed it. At 3:25 a.m. exactly, everything stopped. The alarm cut off mid-blast. The ship leveled instantly. The PA system went silent. Passengers stood frozen, confused, many still crying. The officer's radio crackled with the captain's voice. "Calm now. All stations report status." Engineering confirmed no flooding, no damage, all systems normal. It was as if nothing had happened, except it had. I had 47 minutes of audio, recording. My phone's gyroscope had logged the listing angle. Security cameras throughout the ship would show thousands of passengers responding to an emergency that, according to the ship's systems, never occurred. The next morning, a senior officer requested I meet him in a private conference room. He knew who I was. Apparently, my cover had been compromised early in the voyage. He didn't want to discuss safety violations. He wanted to show me a file. Inside were reports dating back to 2015, when MSC Seaside first began operating this route. Every October, usually between the 22nd and 25th, there were incidents. False alarms, phantom PA announcements, passengers reporting conflicting emergency instructions. The phenomena lasted exactly 47 minutes and always occurred near coordinates 17 de Grant, 87 de Grob Nasser. "We sail over the Meridian wreck site," he said quietly. "Every October route passes right over it. We've tried changing the schedule, rerouting, but corporate won't alter the itinerary. It's Halloween week, huge booking revenue, and usually nothing happens." just some weird radio interference, maybe a couple passengers claiming they heard strange announcements. This was more than interference, I said. He nodded. Some years it's worse. Anniversary years especially. 2012 was bad, 50 years after the sinking. This year, 2023, 61 years. We don't know why certain years trigger stronger, whatever this is. You're knowingly sailing passengers over a mass grave during the anniversary of the disaster, I said, my voice harder than intended. We follow all international maritime regulations, he replied. There's no regulation against sailing over historic wreck sites. And what would we report? That ghosts trigger our emergency systems? That passengers experience collective hallucinations of a 60-year-old sinking? I filed my official safety report 3 weeks later. It was thorough, professional, noting minor violations, but giving MSC Seaside a passing grade on emergency procedures. I didn't mention the phantom names, the vintage life vests, or the 47 minutes of impossible emergency we'd experienced. But I also filed a separate incident report with the Maritime Safety Board, including all my evidence, audio recordings, photographs, timeline correlations. I requested they investigate the pattern of October incidents on this route and consider requiring cruise lines to avoid wreck sites during anniversary periods. The board's response came in December. They'd reviewed my materials and were concerned about my mental state. The stress of constant travel and auditing was well documented in causing psychological breaks. They recommended I take medical leave, undergo evaluation, and consider whether this career was sustainable for me. I lost my license in February 2024. The official reason was compromised professional judgment following documented psychological episode. I now work a desk job processing maritime safety, paperwork, taking anti-anxiety medication daily, and living with the knowledge that I'm labeled as the inspector who had a breakdown and started believing in ghosts. But I still have the recordings. I still have the photographs of those life vests with names written in 60-year-old ink. And I still track the MSC Seaside's route every October, watching cruise booking sites, knowing that thousands of passengers will sail over those coordinates, never knowing that for 47 minutes, they might experience someone else's death, someone else's terror, someone else's final moments before the cold Caribbean water closed over their heads. The worst part isn't that it happened. The worst part is that it will keep happening every October, every anniversary year, getting stronger. Because there's no regulation against sailing over the dead. No protocol for preventing passengers from reliving maritime disasters. No category in my old safety checklists for ghost ship phenomena. And late at night, when I can't sleep, I hear them, those phantom names being called at roll call. Adding more every year, the roster of the dead growing longer as new disasters occur. All of them waiting at their assigned muster stations in the cold, dark water. Waiting for their names to be called one more time. She sang the same song every night, and each time, one of us would wake up unable to speak. My bachelorette party was supposed to be the celebration of a lifetime. 8 of us, best friends since college. 3 nights on the Carnival Freedom sailing from Miami to Nassau over Halloween weekend 2021. We'd planned everything months in advance. Matching costumes for the Halloween party, spa appointments, and most importantly, karaoke nights at the Red Frog pub on Deck 5. We were the kind of friends who'd spent countless nights singing badly at dive bars, and we wanted one last hurrah before my wedding in December. We boarded on October 29th, giddy with freedom and rum punch from the welcome deck party. That first night, we claimed our spot at the karaoke lounge around 9 p.m., ready to embarrass ourselves with pop songs and 80s power ballads. The venue was perfect. Dim lighting, decent sound system, a small stage with a single microphone stand, and a DJ who seemed amused by our enthusiasm. We went through our rotation. Terrible renditions of Whitney Houston, drunk attempts at Beyoncé, laughing so hard we could barely finish songs. Around 11 p.m. between our sets, a woman took the stage. She hadn't signed up on the list. I'd been watching it obsessively to plan our performances. She just appeared, walking from the back of the lounge toward the microphone with an odd, gliding gait. She wore a floor-length evening gown in deep emerald green, the style unmistakably 1940s. Fitted bodice, flowing skirt, long sleeves. Her hair was styled in perfect vintage Victory rolls, her makeup pale and dramatic with dark lips. "Amazing costume," one of my friends whispered. We assumed she was part of the ship's entertainment, maybe a special Halloween performer. The DJ didn't introduce her, didn't even seem to notice as she took the microphone. The lounge had been loud with conversation and laughter, but as she began to sing, silence fell like a physical weight. The song was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Not the melody. That was hauntingly beautiful, simple and repetitive. But the language was unfamiliar, the words flowing together in a way that sounded almost like Spanish, but older, more formal. And the emotion in her voice was devastating. Pure grief, longing, loss so profound it felt like drowning. Within seconds, I had tears streaming down my face. Around me, my friends were crying too, and so were other patrons, strangers clutching their drinks, faces contorted with inexplicable sadness. The performance lasted maybe 4 minutes, though it felt longer. When she finished, she simply turned and walked off stage, disappearing into the shadows at the back of the lounge. No applause, no acknowledgement. The DJ immediately started playing upbeat music, and the spell broke. People laughed uncomfortably, wiped their faces, made jokes about emotional songs. We tried to shake it off, blamed the alcohol and the late hour. But the next morning, one of my friends woke up, without a voice, completely mute. She could mouth words, could breathe normally, but no sound came out. We thought she'd strained her vocal cords during our karaoke session. The ship's medical center examined her. No inflammation, no physical cause. The doctor prescribed rest and said it would likely resolve in a few days, possibly just stress-related laryngitis. That night, October 30th, we debated returning to the karaoke lounge. My voiceless friend couldn't participate anyway, and something about the previous night felt off. But the rest of us wanted to make the most of our last full night aboard. We showed up at 10 p.m., determined to have fun. She appeared again at 11:07 p.m. Same dress, same hair, same gliding walk to the stage. This time I noticed details I'd missed before. Her skin had an odd translucence, like she was lit from within. Her feet didn't quite touch the floor. And when she gripped the microphone, her hand passed slightly through the metal stand before solidifying. She sang the same song, word for word identical to the night before. I recognized the pattern, the specific inflections. And again, that crushing sadness overwhelmed the room. But this time, I noticed something else. As she sang, she was looking at us. Her eyes moved across our group of friends, studying each face with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When her gaze landed on me, I felt cold water rush into my lungs just for a second, just enough to make me gasp and choke. The performance ended. She vanished. And the next morning, another friend woke up mute. Now we were terrified. 2 voiceless friends, both perfectly healthy except for the inexplicable silence. We reported it to ship security, to guest services, demanded to know who the performer was. No one had any record of a special entertainer. The DJ, when we confronted him, claimed he hadn't seen anyone take the stage during our sets. "You girls were singing the whole time," he insisted, looking at us like we were crazy. But we had witnesses. Other patrons in the lounge who'd been there, who'd cried during that haunting performance. Except when we tracked them down, they didn't remember it. They remembered us singing, remembered having a good time, but no woman in a vintage dress, no song that made everyone weep. My friend who'd gone mute first started having nightmares. She'd wake up gasping, make frantic hand gestures trying to communicate the dream. Finally, she wrote it down. Drowning while singing. Water in my throat, but the song keeps coming out. Can't stop singing even underwater. She's there, pulling me deeper, making me finish the song. I spent most of October 31st, Halloween, in the ship's library, desperately researching. I recorded myself humming the melody from memory and used a music identification app. Nothing came up. I posted clips on music forums, asking if anyone recognized it. Within hours, a musicologist responded. The song was called Sangre y Mar, Blood and Sea, a sailor's morning ballad from the 1940s, sung by Caribbean and South American crews after shipmates died at sea. It was considered cursed, bad luck to perform, because it was believed to call the dead back from the water. I dug deeper into maritime history, cross-referencing the Carnival Freedoms route with World War II incidents. In October 1944, a cruise ship converted to troop transport had been torpedoed in the Bahamas. Among the casualties was the ship's entertainer, a young woman who'd been performing in the ship's lounge when the torpedo struck. Survivors reported that she'd continued singing even as water rushed into the room, her voice carrying above the chaos until the ship went down. Her body was never recovered, but several survivors insisted they could still hear her singing underwater as they escaped. The description matched. Vintage evening gown, Victory roll hairstyle, pale skin, and the route our ship was taking passed within miles of that wreck site. I tried to convince my friends to skip karaoke on Halloween night, but it was our last night, and some of them refused to let fear ruin the bachelorette party. It's just coincidence, they argued. People lose their voices on cruises all the time. 6 of us were left with voices. 2 sat in silence, communicating through frantic notes and gestures. We arrived at the Red Frog pub at 10:30 p.m. The venue was packed for Halloween. Passengers in costumes, drinking, celebrating. We took our usual spot, sang a few songs, tried to project normalcy. But I kept watching the clock. 11:07 p.m. That's when she'd appeared both previous nights. At 11:06, the temperature in the lounge dropped noticeably. Conversations faltered. And at exactly 11:07, she was there. Not walking from the back this time, just suddenly present on stage, as if she'd materialized from the air itself. This time, she didn't wait. She began singing immediately, and the effect was more powerful than before. People in the audience started sobbing uncontrollably. Several dropped to their knees. The DJ tried to cut the sound system, but her voice carried without amplification, filling the space with that devastating melody. And she was staring directly at me. Her dark eyes locked on mine, her pale hand extending toward me as she sang. I felt it immediately. Water filling my lungs, cold seawater pouring down my throat, even though I was breathing normally. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. The room spun. My friends were shouting, but I couldn't hear them over the roaring in my ears, over the sensation of drowning on dry land. Through my fading vision, I saw her smile. Her mouth formed the words of the song, but I heard different words in my head. Finish what I started. Sing with me. Join me below. My friends rushed the stage, all 6 of them, knocking over chairs, pushing through the crowd. They grabbed me, pulled me backward, away from the microphone, away from her reaching hand. The moment they broke the line of sight between us, the spell shattered. Air rushed back into my lungs. I collapsed, coughing and retching, tasting salt water even though nothing was there. The singer's voice cut off mid-note. She looked at my friends with something like fury, her translucent form flickering. Then she vanished, not walking away, but dissipating like smoke, leaving only a faint smell of seawater and decay. And in that instant, my two voiceless friends gasped. Their voices returned simultaneously, both of them screaming, crying, words tumbling out after days of silence. The entire lounge erupted into chaos. People demanding to know what they'd just witnessed, security rushing in, the DJ standing frozen behind his equipment. We were taken to a private office. A senior cruise line representative sat us down, and he looked exhausted, defeated. "She comes back every October," he said quietly. "The entertainer who died in 1944. She appears in the karaoke lounge, always performing that same song. Usually she just sings and leaves. We've tried closing the lounge during Halloween, but she appears anyway. We've tried blessing it, investigated every possible explanation." "She's taking people's voices," I said, my own voice hoarse. "She's trying to collect singers." He nodded. "Every few years, someone loses their voice after her performance. It usually comes back within a week. But there have been cases." He paused. "In 2015, a passenger who heard her sing multiple times never recovered their voice. In 2008, someone jumped overboard the night after her performance, and witnesses said they were singing that song as they went over the railing." "Why don't you warn people?" one of my friends demanded. "Would you have believed us?" he asked. "Would you have even booked the cruise? She only appears in this specific lounge, only during Halloween sailings through the Bahamas. We monitor it closely, intervene when necessary. But she's getting stronger. This year, she nearly succeeded in taking one of you completely." The DJ, who'd been brought to the meeting, spoke up for the first time. "She just wants to finish her final performance. That's what I've been told. She was singing when the ship went down, and she never got to complete the song. So she comes back every October, looking for someone to help her finish it." "By killing them," I said flatly. He didn't deny it. We disembarked the next morning in Miami, and I haven't listened to music since. Not songs on the radio, not background music in stores, nothing. The moment I hear melody, I feel water in my lungs, taste salt, hear her voice underneath whatever's playing. My wedding was postponed indefinitely. I couldn't walk down an aisle to music, couldn't have a first dance. Eventually, my fiancée and I just drifted apart. How do you explain that you can't have a wedding because a ghost tried to drown you with a song? Our group of 8 friends dissolved. 2 of them sued the cruise line and settled out of court with NDAs. 3 refused to speak about what happened and blocked the rest of us on social media. The remaining 2 stay in touch. But we can't be in the same room without tension, without remembering that night, without one of us breaking down. I still have recordings on my phone. Shaky videos my friends took that show the stage empty while we all reacted to her presence. The audio captures that melody, faint but unmistakable, even though the DJ swears no sound came through his system. I've sent the recordings to paranormal researchers, maritime historians, anyone who might have answers. A musicologist confirmed the song is Sangre y Mar and sent me the only known written version, Spanish lyrics about sailors calling their dead brothers home from the sea. The final verse, roughly translated, says, "I sing until you join me, until your voice becomes mine, until we all sing together in the deep where no one hears but the drowned. She didn't finish her performance in 1944. She's been trying to finish it for 77 years, one voice at a time, collecting singers to join her eternal chorus in the wreckage below. And every October, she'll appear on that stage, in that lounge, looking for someone to finally help her sing the last note of a song that should have ended when the cold Bahama water closed over her head. I pray she never finds them, because I know what that final note sounds like. I heard it in my head as I drowned on dry land. It's the sound of surrender, of lungs filling with seawater, of voices fading into the deep. And once you sing it, once you join her chorus, you're hers forever, trapped in that moment between the torpedo striking and the ship going under, singing the same morning ballad for eternity while the living dance and laugh above your grave, never knowing you're down there, still performing, still waiting for applause that will never come. We never ordered room service, but every night at 3:33 a.m., someone delivered a meal meant for the dead. I'd worked 60-hour weeks for 15 years to afford that vacation. Owner's Suite 1234 on the Royal Caribbean Serenade of the Seas, the pinnacle of cruise luxury. My wife, our 12-year-old daughter, and our 9-year-old son deserved it. We were celebrating our daughter's birthday with an Alaska cruise, October 18th, 2019. 7 nights of glaciers, whale watching, and what the brochure promised would be memories of a lifetime. The suite cost more than my first car, but seeing my kids' faces when they walked into that sprawling cabin made every penny worth it. The suite was magnificent. 2 bedrooms, a living area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, a dining table that seated 6, and a private balcony. The decor was elegant, cream and gold with crystal fixtures and artwork that actually looked expensive. My wife kept taking photos, already planning how she'd frame them for our home office. We spent the first day exploring the ship, attending the safety drill, letting the kids run wild in the pool area while we finally relaxed. That night, we collapsed into our beds, exhausted and happy. I remember checking my phone before sleep, 11:47 p.m. The ship's gentle rocking had us all unconscious within minutes. The knock woke me at exactly 3:33 a.m., 3 sharp raps on the suite's door. I jolted awake, disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness. My wife stirred beside me. "Did you order room service?" she mumbled. I hadn't. I stumbled to the door, looked through the peephole, empty corridor. But when I opened the door, there was a room service cart. An elaborate one, the kind they use for the premium dining packages. It held covered silver platters, fine china, crystal glasses, linen napkins folded into intricate shapes. A card on top read, Suite 1234, in elegant calligraphy. I wheeled it inside, confused. My wife came out, squinting at the unexpected delivery. "Maybe it's a birthday surprise for her?" she suggested, referring to our daughter. The cruise line knew it was her birthday. We'd mentioned it during booking. Perhaps this was their premium guest treatment. We lifted the covers. The food beneath looked elaborate. Some kind of roasted meat, potatoes, vegetables arranged artistically, a decadent dessert. But something was off. The food was cold. Not room temperature, but refrigerator cold, as if it had been sitting for hours. And the smell, faint but unmistakable, was wrong, spoiled. We replaced the covers quickly, decided to call guest services in the morning to clarify the error, and left the cart in the hallway. The next night, October 19th, the knock came again, 3:33 a.m. exactly. Same cart, same elaborate setup. This time I was irritated. Clearly there was some system error with our suite number. I didn't bring it inside, just left it in the corridor and called guest services immediately. The night manager, who answered sounded confused. Sir, we have no room service orders for Suite 1234. And our kitchen doesn't operate between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. The overnight staff is minimal. He promised to investigate and remove the cart. By morning, the cart was gone. But that night, October 20th, it appeared again. 3:33 a.m. 3 knocks, elaborate meal. This time, I examined it more carefully before calling anyone. The china pattern was unusual, ornate in a way that seemed outdated. I photographed it, thinking I'd show management, prove this was happening. When I lifted the covers, I noticed the menu card tucked beside one of the plates. The items listed were strange. Consommé Célestine, filet de sole marguerite, tournedos rossini, pommes duchesse. These weren't dishes on any of the ship's current menus. I'd studied them all when booking. The language felt old-fashioned, the presentation formal in a way that reminded me of historic restaurant menus I'd seen in museums. My daughter appeared in the living area, rubbing her eyes. "What's for dinner?" she asked, still half asleep, confused about the time. "Nothing, honey. Go back to bed." But she'd already moved toward the cart, reaching for one of the covered platters. My wife intercepted her, guided her back to bed. "She's sleepwalking," my wife said. "She hasn't done that in years." That morning, October 21st, I went to guest services in person, showed them the photos, demanded an explanation. The representative looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I can assure you, we're not delivering anything to your suite. Our records show no orders, no deliveries. Is it possible you're experiencing some confusion? Perhaps the time zone changes?" I wasn't confused. I had photographs, timestamps, my whole family as witnesses. But the representative maintained there was nothing in their system. He offered to have security review footage from our corridor. "We'll get to the bottom of this." Security called me that afternoon. They'd reviewed the footage. From 3 a.m. to 4 a.m., the hallway outside Suite 1234 was empty. No staff, no carts, nothing. Yet my phone's photos clearly showed a cart outside my door at 3:33 a.m. The timestamps matched. "Perhaps the cart was there earlier, and you photographed it then?" the security officer suggested delicately, implying I was staging this for some reason. That night, my son woke us at 2:45 a.m., screaming from a nightmare. We calmed him down, got him back to sleep. My wife and I stayed awake, talking quietly in the living area, watching the clock. At 3:33 a.m. exactly, we heard it. 3 knocks. But we were sitting 10 feet from the door, and we could see through the peephole. The corridor was empty. I opened the door. The cart was there. We both saw it materialize, not wheeled into place, not appearing in a flash, but slowly solidifying from transparent to solid over the course of maybe 3 seconds. Like a photograph developing. And this time, in the dim corridor lighting, I noticed something I'd missed before. The food on the plates was arranged for 4 people, 4 place settings, 4 napkins, 4 glasses, 4 meals elaborately presented, with small place cards at each setting. I picked one up. It had a name written in that same elegant calligraphy. Not our names. Names I didn't recognize. My wife was trembling. "Bring it inside," she whispered. "We need to document this." Against my better judgment, I wheeled the cart into our suite. We photographed everything. The place cards, the dishes, the archaic menu. The food, when we uncovered it this time, was visibly spoiled, rotted. The meat was gray-green, the vegetables liquefied, the dessert covered in fuzzy mold. Yet the card insisted it had been freshly prepared. My daughter appeared again, this time walking directly to the cart with her eyes fully open but unseeing. She reached for one of the molded plates. My wife grabbed her, but our daughter fought back with surprising strength, clawing toward the food, her mouth opening and closing as if chewing something that wasn't there. We got her back to bed, but she continued the sleepwalking episodes every night. Always at 3:33 a.m., always drawn to that cart. By October 23rd, we were taking shifts staying awake, making sure she didn't reach the spoiled food. I spent the days researching, using the ship's library and internet access. Royal Caribbean's Serenade of the Seas had been in service since 2003. But I dug deeper into the company's history, into the legacy of luxury cruise travel. I found references to ships from the 1930s, to formal dining customs, to the specific dishes listed on that phantom menu. And then I found the incident report. Not from this ship, but from a predecessor vessel that had operated Alaska routes in 1938. 4 passengers, a family, had died in their luxury suite from poisoning. Arsenic in their meal, delivered by a crew member who was later convicted of murder. The family had been celebrating their daughter's 12th birthday. The poisoning occurred at 3:33 a.m. on October 24th. When they woke for a special late-night birthday dinner the father had arranged. The names on the place cards matched the family from 1938. I showed my findings to the ship's senior officers on October 24th, Halloween Eve. They finally admitted what they'd been hiding. Owner's Suite 1234 was built on the modern ship's deck plan in the exact location where the original ship's formal dining room had been. The architectural drawings overlapped perfectly. Every few years, guests in that suite reported strange occurrences during October sailings, sounds of dining, phantom smells of food, objects moving on their own. But we've never had manifestations this strong, the officer admitted. Usually it's just ambient phenomena. Sounds mostly. We've never had the meal actually appear, never had it interact with guests this directly. Why didn't you warn us? My wife demanded. Would you have believed us? Would you have wanted the suite? He looked genuinely distressed. This is our most expensive accommodation. We can't market it as haunted. That night, October 24th, the anniversary, we tried to stay in the children's rooms, avoid the main suite area entirely. But at 3:33 a.m., we all woke simultaneously in the living area. Not in our beds, not in pajamas. We were seated at the dining table, dressed in formal wear we'd never seen before. My wife in a 1930s style evening gown, me in a tuxedo with period details, our children in vintage formal clothes. The table was set for 4 with that phantom meal, no longer covered, now exposed in all its rotted horror. Funeral flowers in the center, debris mixed with the food. And standing around us, translucent but visible, were 4 figures in matching formal wear, their faces gray, their eyes hollow. We were experiencing their final meal. I could taste arsenic, metallic and bitter. Even though my mouth was empty, my stomach cramped violently. Beside me, my wife doubled over, retching. Our daughter was choking, her hands clawing at her throat. Our son's nose began bleeding, dripping onto the vintage suit he wore. The phantoms watched us with expressions of profound sadness. They weren't malevolent. They were trapped, forever reliving their death. And now we were trapped with them. I felt my heart racing, then slowing, then racing again in an arrhythmic pattern. Poisoning symptoms, death symptoms, symptoms I shouldn't be experiencing, but was, as our reality merged with theirs. My daughter screamed, a real, primal scream that shattered the trance. The formal wear vanished, leaving us in our pajamas. The table was normal again, no spoiled food, no flowers. The phantoms faded, and we were released, We packed in the dark and demanded to be moved to any other cabin immediately. The crew accommodated us without question, transferring us to a standard interior room on a different deck. We spent the remainder of the cruise in that windowless space, grateful for its ordinariness, its lack of history. But the damage was done. My daughter required intensive therapy for trauma and sleep disorders. She couldn't be in rooms with dining tables without panicking. My son developed severe anxiety around food, losing weight, requiring hospitalization. My marriage couldn't survive the strain. The guilt of having brought our children into that situation, the constant fear, the way we blamed each other for not leaving sooner. We divorced within a year. I've since learned that Suite 1234 has been quietly removed from bookings during October. Not officially, the cruise line won't admit the reason. But if you try to reserve it for late October dates, the system shows it as unavailable for maintenance. Yet the suite still exists, still gleams with luxury, still offers those floor-to-ceiling ocean views. And every October 24th at 3:33 a.m., whether guests are present or not, a room service card appears outside the door. 4 place settings, 4 meals, 4 place cards with names of people who died 87 years ago. Still waiting for someone to join them at their eternal dinner, their final celebration, their birthday meal that lasted forever in the worst possible way. The ship's archival records, which I eventually accessed through legal channels, include incident reports spanning decades. Guests reporting similar experiences, always in October, always in that suite. Most dismissed it, checked out early, never filed formal complaints. But a few like us stayed too long, participated too fully, and carried pieces of that phantom meal with them forever, the taste of poison on their tongues, the feeling of dying at a dinner table, the knowledge that somewhere in the ocean, that family is still waiting for the meal to end, for the arsenic to finish its work, for the nightmare to finally be over. I can't eat in restaurants anymore. Can't sit at formal dinners. Can't celebrate birthdays without tasting metal and feeling my heart stutter. My children will carry this trauma for life. And every night at 3:33 a.m., wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, I wake up. I always wake up. And for just a moment, I smell spoiled food and see those hollow eyes watching me, waiting, inviting me back to a table I'll never escape, to a meal that never ends. The tour bus took us to a village that hasn't existed for 50 years, and we didn't realize until we couldn't leave. I'd been a travel agent for 7 years, specializing in cruise bookings, but I'd never actually experienced one myself. My agency sent me on a research trip in late October 2022, Norwegian Bliss, Mexican Riviera route, to evaluate the experience firsthand so I could better sell it to clients. I was meticulous in my planning, booking every type of excursion, documenting everything for my report. The shore excursion to a traditional coastal village near Mazatlan seemed perfect. Authentic cultural experience, highly rated, officially sanctioned by Norwegian Cruise Line. We docked in Mazatlan on October 31st, Halloween morning. The port was bustling with tourists, vendors, the usual organized chaos. I joined my excursion group at 9 a.m. 14 passengers, mixed ages, mostly couples. Our tour guide introduced himself with a warm smile, speaking English with a thick accent. He wore what looked like authentic local clothing, slightly worn but clean. The bus was older than I expected, no air conditioning, vinyl seats cracked from sun exposure. But I assumed that was part of the authentic experience. The drive took about 40 minutes, winding away from the tourist areas into rural countryside. The landscape was beautiful. Scrub brush, distant mountains, occasional small houses. But as we drove, I noticed the roads deteriorating. Paved highway gave way to poorly maintained asphalt, then to dirt roads with deep ruts. The other passengers commented on the rough ride, joking about adventure travel. We arrived at the village around 10 a.m. It was small, maybe 30 buildings clustered around a central plaza with a church. Adobe structures, tile roofs, narrow streets. Picturesque in a faded way. But something felt immediately off. The buildings, while structurally intact, showed signs of long neglect. Paint peeling in sheets, not recent weathering but decades of decay. Windows were intact but filmed with grime. The plaza's fountain was dry, filled with dead leaves and debris. "Where is everyone?" one passenger asked. The village appeared completely deserted. Our guide explained in his heavily accented English that residents were shy of tourists, that we'd see them as we walked around. He spoke in an odd cadence, using phrases that sounded formal, outdated. "You will find the peoples in their time," he said, gesturing toward the village. "They wait for the visitors always." We began our walking tour. The guide pointed out the church. Colonial era, he said, very historic. The old market building, the houses where traditional crafts were made. But we saw no one. No residents, no other tourists, no vehicles except our bus parked at the village entrance. The silence was profound, broken only by wind through empty buildings and our footsteps on dusty streets. Then, gradually, we started seeing people. A woman hanging laundry in a courtyard, an old man sitting on a doorstep, children playing in a side street. But they didn't acknowledge us. We'd wave, call out greetings, and they'd continue their activities as if we were invisible. Their clothing struck me as strange. Styles from decades past, faded and worn, but not vintage fashion, just old. The children's toys were simple, handmade, nothing plastic or modern. One passenger, a retired teacher, tried speaking to a woman in broken Spanish. The woman looked through her, not rudely, but as if the passenger literally wasn't there. "Maybe they've been told not to interact with tourists," someone suggested. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like we existed on different planes, occupying the same space, but not the same reality. I checked my phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising in a rural area. But what was surprising? The time showed 10:47 a.m., the same time it had been when I'd last checked 20 minutes ago. I tapped the screen, thinking it had frozen. The seconds ticked forward normally, but when I checked again 5 minutes later, it still read 10:47 a.m. Other passengers noticed their phones acting strangely too. Time stuck, GPS not working, cameras taking photos that appeared corrupted or showed the village empty even when we were photographing residents. The tour guide led us to the church, explaining its history in that same archaic Spanish that I was beginning to recognize as not just accented, but genuinely old-fashioned. Language patterns from half a century ago. Inside, the church was dim and musty. Religious artifacts covered in dust. Candles unlit. Prayer books from the 1970s, pages yellowed and brittle. "When was this church last used?" I asked the guide. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Always it is used. The peoples come every Sunday. Today is Tuesday. You come on Tuesday." But today was Monday, October 31st, 2022, a Monday. I pulled aside another passenger, a man who'd been taking notes for his travel blog. "Does any of this feel wrong to you?" I whispered. He nodded slowly. "The residents are wearing clothes from the 70s. Not reproduction, genuine vintage, worn thin. And did you notice? No power lines, no telephone poles, no satellite dishes. This village has no electricity, no modern infrastructure at all." We decided to cut the tour short, head back to the bus. But when we returned to where we'd parked, The bus wasn't there. The street was empty. Our guide had vanished. We walked to the village entrance, at least where we thought it was. But the roads led back into the village no matter which direction we tried. Every path looped back to the central plaza. Panic was setting in. We could see the ocean in the distance, maybe 2 miles away. We could even see cruise ships on the horizon, though something about their profiles looked wrong. We tried hiking directly toward the water, but the terrain became impossible. Cliffs that hadn't been visible from the village, dense vegetation that seemed to appear from nowhere, roads that twisted back on themselves in physically impossible ways. I found a small library building, door unlocked. Inside were newspapers, all from 1973. A calendar on the wall showed October 1973. The most recent date circled was October 30th. Beside the calendar was a warning poster about hurricane preparedness, urging residents to evacuate if officials gave the order. The poster was weathered, but not decades-old weathered. It looked like it had been printed months ago, not 50 years. The retired teacher found me in the library. Her face was ashen. "I remember this," she whispered. Hurricane 1973. I was teaching in Southern California when it happened. A hurricane hit the Mexican coast on Halloween. Several villages were completely destroyed. This was one of them. We gathered the rest of our group, shared what we'd discovered. The tour guide reappeared, standing in the plaza, and when we confronted him, he didn't respond to our questions. Just repeated the same phrases. "You will find the peoples in their time. They wait for the visitors always." One passenger had a GPS device that still functioned. She showed us the coordinates. We weren't where we should be. According to the device, we were 3 miles inland from any mapped road, in a location that showed as empty terrain on the map. No village. Nothing but coastal scrubland. The sky was darkening rapidly, despite it being barely noon by our stuck clocks. Storm clouds rolling in with unnatural speed. The wind picked up, strong enough to make the old buildings creak. The village residents, those ghostly figures we'd been seeing, were moving now with purpose, boarding up windows, securing items, preparing for something. I found old tourist brochures in a shop, dated October 1973. They advertised this exact tour, the same route, the same village, the same company name. And clipped to one brochure was a newspaper article from November 1973. Tourist bus missing after hurricane, driver and 14 passengers presumed dead. The article described how a tour bus had been traveling to a coastal village when the hurricane struck unexpectedly. The vehicle was found days later, overturned in a ravine, but the bodies were never recovered. The bus driver was named and pictured. It was our guide. Same face, same slight build, same worn clothing. We were experiencing their final tour, the tour that had ended with them dying in the hurricane, and we were about to die with them. The storm hit with devastating force. Rain horizontal, wind strong enough to tear shutters from buildings. We huddled with several other passengers in the church, the only structure that looked sturdy enough to survive. The village residents were there too, praying, crying, holding children, still not acknowledging us, but now we could see them clearly. Solid, real, terrified. The guide stood at the church entrance, looking out at the storm. He turned to us, and for the first time, his eyes, villages that don't exist anymore. Sometimes they return with sleeping passengers who've lost hours and gained memories of places that were destroyed decades ago. Sometimes the buses don't return at all. And somewhere in the Mexican countryside, in a village that was swept away by a hurricane 50 years ago, a tour guide waits at the entrance, ready to welcome the next group of visitors, to show them the church and the plaza and the residents who will never acknowledge them. Because they're all trapped in that final tour, that final Halloween, dying over and over when the storm comes and the water rises and the living learn what it means to be lost in someone else's ending. As someone who spent 30 years at sea, I know every ship sound and protocol, which is why the captain's announcements terrified me. Our captain was in a coma. Retirement had been harder than I'd expected. 30 years in the Navy, most of it at sea, and suddenly I was home every night, with nothing but silence and my own thoughts. My wife had been patient, waiting through decades of deployments, and she'd always dreamed of a transatlantic crossing. So for our 30th anniversary, I booked us on the Celebrity Eclipse Southampton to New York, departing October 25th, 2023. 8 days at sea. No ports, just open ocean. She was excited. I was quietly relieved to be back in a maritime environment, even as a passenger. I'm trained to notice things others miss. The rhythm of engines, the angle of a ship's movement, the subtle changes in crew behavior that indicate problems. The Eclipse was a fine vessel. Modern, well-maintained, professional crew. I felt comfortable from the moment we boarded. The captain gave the customary welcome announcement as we left Southampton, his voice confident and practiced. Standard maritime protocol. Nothing unusual. That first night, October 25th, I woke at 2:47 a.m. to a PA announcement. The captain's voice, but the tone was wrong. Urgent, almost desperate. All hands, we have souls overboard. Repeat, souls overboard. Coordinates 50 degrees north, 5 degrees west. Immediate search and rescue protocols. I was out of bed instantly, pulling on clothes. My wife stirred. What's happening? Man overboard, I said, already at the door. But something felt wrong. There had been no general emergency alarm, no 7 short blasts and 1 long. Just that announcement. Then silence. The corridor was empty. No crew rushing to stations, no passengers emerging confused. I made my way to the nearest crew access point, used the command voice I'd honed over 3 decades. Officer, what's the status on the overboard situation? The young crew member looked confused. Sir, there's no emergency. Everything's normal. I just heard the captain announce souls overboard. He checked his radio, spoke briefly to someone. Sir, no announcement was made. The bridge confirms all normal operations. You may have been dreaming. I wasn't dreaming. I'd been fully awake, heard it clearly through the cabin's PA speaker. But I let it go, returned to my cabin. My wife was sitting up. False alarm? She asked. Apparently. But I couldn't shake the phrasing. Souls overboard. Not man overboard or person overboard. The standard terminology, souls. The next night, October 26th, it happened again. 2:47 a.m. exactly. The captain's voice over the PA. Attention all passengers. Roll call beginning. Please respond when your name is called. Then he began reading names. Dozens of them, in alphabetical order with cabin numbers. But the names meant nothing to me. They weren't passengers I'd met or heard mentioned. I checked the passenger manifest the next morning, using my naval credentials to access information most passengers couldn't. None of the names from the announcement appeared on the list. I approached the guest services desk, asked if there had been a late-night PA test or announcement. They checked their logs. Nothing. No announcements between midnight and 6 a.m. But other passengers had heard it. I overheard conversations at breakfast, people confused about the roll call, wondering why their names hadn't been called, why they'd been woken up for something that apparently didn't happen. Yet when they asked crew members, they were told nothing had been announced. On October 27th, the announcement changed. 2:47 a.m. The captain's voice. Navigation update. Current heading 270 degrees. Coordinates 48 degrees north, 15 degrees west. Approaching site of SS Fortunata, lost with all hands November 2nd, 926. Weather deteriorating. Recommend course change. That got my attention immediately. I have extensive knowledge of maritime disasters, required study for naval officers. The SS Fortunata had indeed sunk in 1926 during a transatlantic crossing. But why would our captain announce that? And why recommend a course change when, according to him, we were approaching it? I spent the day investigating. The Eclipse's published route for this crossing didn't go near the Fortunata wreck site. We should be hundreds of miles north. But when I checked the ship's heading using my own compass and GPS, we were trending south. Subtly, gradually, but definitely off course. I requested a meeting with the staff captain, second in command. He was professional, but dismissive of my concerns. Sir, I appreciate your naval experience, but our navigation is precise. We're exactly on course, and I can assure you, no unusual announcements have been made. Then who's making the announcements? I pressed. He hesitated. Sir, I need to be frank with you. The captain suffered a stroke on embarkation day. He's in the medical bay, unconscious, stable, but unresponsive. I've been in command since we left Southampton. Any announcements you're hearing? He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Several passengers have reported similar experiences. We believe it's some kind of audio phenomenon, possibly interference in the PA system. The voice is his, I said. The actual captain's voice. Yes, he admitted. We've reviewed recordings. When these incidents occur, the voice matches our captain's exactly. But he's been comatose for 6 days. He can't be making announcements. That night, October 28th, I stayed awake. At 2:47 a.m., the PA crackled to life. Warning to all passengers. The others below deck are rising. Secure your cabins. Do not open doors to anyone claiming to be crew after 3 a.m. They are not crew. They were never crew. My wife woke, terrified. What is that? Other passengers were emerging into corridors now, some screaming, demanding explanations. Crew members scrambled to calm everyone, insisting no announcement had been made. But hundreds of people had heard it. You can't dismiss that as mass hallucination. I recorded the next announcement on my phone, October 29th, 2:47 a.m. To passengers in cabins 4127, 40 Mustin 3, 4589, 5012, 5234, 567, 6289, 6234. Your assignments have been confirmed. Report to muster stations when the final call is made. You will know when. Those cabin numbers meant nothing to me, but I tracked down passengers from several of them. They were terrified, having heard their cabin numbers specifically called. One elderly man showed me his ticket, cabin 4127. What does it mean? He asked. Report for what? I didn't have answers. But I was beginning to form a theory that terrified me more than any enemy fire I'd faced in 30 years of service. The ship's library had historical records. I spent October 30th researching. Celebrity cruises had operated transatlantic routes for decades, but I went back further, to their predecessor companies, to ships that had sailed similar routes. And I found it. In October 1924, a luxury liner had sunk during a transatlantic crossing. The ship's name, SS Eclipse. The captain's name, according to the manifest. The exact same name as our current captain. Not a relative. The identical full name, middle initial, and all. The ship had veered off course, ignoring warnings, and struck an uncharted object at coordinates that, when I plotted them, matched where we'd be if we continued our current subtle southward drift. 287 passengers and crew lost. No survivors. The final communication from the 1924 eclipse had been a PA announcement at 2:47 a.m. on November 1st. All souls prepare for final boarding. It was now October 31st, Halloween. If the pattern held, we'd reach those coordinates by November 1st at 2:47 a.m. I tried warning the staff captain, showed him my research, the course deviation I'd documented, the historical parallels. He was polite but firm. "Sir, we're monitoring all systems. Our navigation is GPS verified. We're not approaching any hazards. I understand these announcements are disturbing, but they're not connected to our actual operations." "The original captain?" I pressed. "Has he said anything? Woken up at all?" The staff captain's expression changed. "He did, actually. Briefly yesterday. He was agitated, kept trying to speak. We couldn't understand most of it, but he kept saying one phrase, 'Don't follow my course.' Then he slipped back into unconsciousness." Halloween night. The ship held parties, costume contests, the usual festivities. I couldn't participate. I stood on deck, watching the ocean, checking my compass obsessively. We were still drifting south, subtly but unmistakably. At 2:47 a.m. on November 1st, the final announcement came. Not just through cabin PA speakers, through every speaker on the ship, corridors, theaters, restaurants, even the bridge. All souls prepare for final boarding. Coordinates reached, history completes. Welcome to Eclipse. And the ship's systems began failing. Not mechanical failure, something worse. The autopilot engaged at full power, ignoring commands. Emergency alarms activated without cause. Watertight doors slammed shut, trapping passengers. The engines surged, pushing us forward at dangerous speed. But toward what? Passengers panicked. Crew members tried to restore order, but were equally confused. I used my naval authority, my command voice honed over 3 decades, and pushed my way to the bridge. Security tried to stop me until I showed them my retired credentials. "I'm qualified to con a vessel. Let me through." The bridge was chaos. The staff captain was unconscious, collapsed over the helm. Other officers frantically tried to override systems that wouldn't respond. The PA system was broadcasting on its own, a recording that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist. The original captain's voice, strong and clear, narrating our course. 47 degrees north, 18 degrees west. Site of my final voyage. Site where I failed. Site where history repeats because I could not break the pattern. I grabbed the radio. "This is retired commander speaking, emergency authority. Override all automated systems, manual helm control now." Naval protocols, codes I'd memorized decades ago. Some officer on the engineering deck recognized the authority, complied. The ship shuddered as systems switched to manual. But we were still moving towards something. I checked the instruments. We were at almost the exact coordinates where the 1924 eclipse had sank. And on the radar, impossibly, was a contact. A large vessel, dead in the water, directly ahead. But when I looked out the windows, there was nothing. Just dark ocean. The PA continued. "I tried to save them. Every voyage I try. Every century the pattern repeats. You cannot break it. No one breaks it. Welcome to Eclipse." I found the PA system controls, physically ripped out the connection. The voice cut off mid-sentence. And as it did, the radar contact vanished. The ship's systems stabilized. The emergency alarms fell silent. We coasted to a stop in open ocean, no hazards visible, no explanations available. The staff captain regained consciousness. He had no memory of collapsing, no explanation for the system failures. Engineering reported no mechanical issues. Every system had simply activated on its own, as if controlled by an external intelligence, then stopped just as mysteriously. But I knew what had happened. The original captain, whether his spirit, his consciousness, or something older than either, had been trying to complete a voyage he'd failed 99 years ago. And his modern namesake, lying comatose in the medical bay, had been pulled into that same compulsion. The pattern wanted to repeat. Captains named Eclipse, ships named Eclipse, voyages that ended at those cursed coordinates. We limped into New York 3 days late, the cruise line blaming technical difficulties. The captain remained hospitalized. Officially, he'd had a stroke. Unofficially, he never regained full consciousness, never spoke another coherent word. He died 6 months later, and his final moments were spent trying to warn people about a ship that sank a century ago. I haven't set foot on a ship since we docked. My wife tried to convince me it was stress, exhaustion, the mind playing tricks after decades of service. But she was there. She heard the announcements. She felt the ship veer off course. She knows what almost happened. The Navy doctors diagnosed me with late-onset PTSD. They said 3 decades of service had finally caught up with me, that retirement had triggered dormant trauma. They prescribed medication, therapy, suggested I avoid maritime environments that might serve as triggers. I didn't tell them the real reason I can't go near water anymore. They wouldn't have believed that some disasters aren't random, that some captains are bound to repeat the mistakes of the dead, that coordinates can be cursed, that ships can be pulled toward their own destruction by voices that shouldn't exist. I burned my naval uniform last month, threw away my compass, my charts, every piece of equipment that connected me to the sea. My wife thinks I've lost my mind, that 30 years of service broke something fundamental inside me. Maybe she's right. Or maybe I'm the only one who understands that we didn't escape that night. We were released. The pattern allowed us to survive because I broke the connection, ripped out the PA system, severed the link between the living captain and his dead predecessor. But the Celebrity Eclipse still sails. Different captains, different passengers, same route. And somewhere in the ship's systems, in the electrical pathways and speaker wires, that voice still waits. The announcements have stopped, according to the cruise line's official position. No more complaints, no more incidents. They believe the problem resolved itself when the original captain died. I know better. The pattern is patient. It waited 99 years between the first eclipse and the second. It can wait longer. And when the conditions align again, the right captain, the right name, the right crossing during the right week, the announcements will return. The PA will crackle to life at 2:47 a.m. And some other retired officer, some other passenger who knows too much about ships and protocol and maritime disasters, will hear that impossible voice warning of souls overboard, calling roll for passengers who don't exist, narrating coordinates of wrecks that pull the living down to join the dead. I sleep with earplugs now, white noise machines, anything to drown out the silence of 2:47 a.m. because even here, hundreds of miles from any ocean, I sometimes wake at that exact moment and hear it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Not through speakers, not through walls, through something deeper, some connection I made when I touched those PA controls, when I heard that voice, when I stood on the bridge of a ship being pulled toward its own destruction and chose to fight back against a pattern a century in the making. The voice still calls. Not every night, but enough. Enough to remind me that I didn't stop it, just delayed it. Enough to know that somewhere in the Atlantic, at coordinates 47 degrees north and 18 degrees west, history is waiting to complete itself. And next time, there might not be someone who recognizes the danger, who knows the protocols, who can break the connection before the final boarding call is answered, and another eclipse joins the first in the cold, dark water, where captains go to repeat their failures forever. If you survived these 10 terrifying tales, you're braver than most. The ocean holds secrets we'll never fully understand, and cruise ships carry more than just passengers. I'm Mr. Nightveil, and these stories remind us that some voyages never truly end. Hit subscribe if you dare to hear more, drop your own experiences in the comments, and remember, the water is always listening. Until next time, sleep carefully.